Let's Get To presents Go Go Astros, a focus on H-Town hardball.
And now that we've given almost a week, we are back with the full Let's Get To. Nope, that's not it. Now that we've given it almost a full week, we are now back with the full Go Astros team to finally discuss the World Series. Is it just me, or does it feel like we lost game 6, about a month ago, not a week ago?
Yeah, it's weird. I was putting this thing on my calendar last night so I'd make sure I got an alert and remind me because I'm 3 time zones away. And I was copying the last invite and was like, oh, that was just last Tuesday. Weird. I feel like, well, I have been in 3 different cities since then, but it's felt like a lifetime ago.
Brian,
the lack of baseball hits hard and it hits quickly.
Yep.
Immediately followed by the time change. So at least here a little further north than y'all, it gets dark before 5 p.m. And
the void is on you. I guess just any, I talked a little bit about it in my last episode. We had Jake Kaplan on to kind of put a moratorium on it, but just overall kind of impressions, big takeaways from the season. We'll start with you, Brian.
I mean, it's a successful season. It's a team that, won the ALCS and got to the World Series. It's an unsuccessful season in that it ends like it does for 29 teams with not achieving the ultimate goal. And the last game being, much more bitter than sweet because your team lost it. And frankly, they lost it in not very close fashion. So it was a very frustrating game.
Yeah. Were you surprised it was such a dud, Andrew, Andy, or was it the kind of thing where we've seen the offense do this before, so it just happened to do this in game 6 of the World Series?
Somebody asked me in my office a couple days afterwards when you knew it wasn't going to happen. And, the logical answer is when Dansby hit the 2-run home run to put it 5-0, and that felt insurmountable. But for me, and, I could have absolutely been proven wrong, but I wasn't. When we had runners in the bottom of the first and had Fried on the rope a little bit and didn't get anything out of that inning, that's when I knew we were going to be in trouble for the day. And it proceeded to work out that way. It's not surprising. It's unfortunate. But to Brian's point, we want to pin it. And I guess most of us are still old enough to remember when that was a big deal. I don't understand, and I have never understood in professional sports why the team that comes in second is all of a sudden the worst loser in all of that league.
Yeah.
There are 28 other teams who would have loved to lose in the World Series this year. And I'm not ever going to be one of those. It's a wasted season unless you win the whole thing. Now they accomplished a lot with a roster that really wasn't as dominant as we've seen in 18 or 19 or even 20, where we had all the pieces and just didn't put it together because of the shortened season. So to win a pennant is always going to be a big deal. To lose the World Series isn't great, but it's not a 2005 situation where you were swept and you really didn't look like you had a chance to be there. We had a game, I think, in game 3 that had things gone differently. The whole series would have turned, and it just didn't. And hats off to the Braves. They were the better team for this series.
Yeah, it's I did the math the other day, and I think for the first 29 years of my fandom, 0 pennants. In the last 16 years of my fandom, 4 pennants. I think you take that at any time.
Yeah, we're still a franchise that glorifies the 1986 team that didn't even win the pennant.
Yeah.
And rightfully so. They're a great team. That was great baseball. And for those of us of that age, that was a lot of memory that happened. That was a great team. But up until 2005, that was maybe the best team that we had from a playoff perspective in the history of the franchise, and that was a team that lost. And that's baseball. It's cliche at this point, but what Faye Vincent said, Bart Giamatti, it's designed to break your heart, and it does every year. But we keep coming back because evidently we're masochists.
Brian?
Yeah, when Andy said 2005, I thought he was going to say because it felt like the end of that era. They'd finally broken through, but it was sort of the last shot they had, and obviously they didn't get back to the playoffs for a decade. That's not the case here, where the Astros will enter 2022 as the favorites in the American League West, and they have a core that's aging out from free agent standpoint, but they also have a young core in Tucker and Jordan and Fromber and Luis Garcia and Jose Urquidy that aren't as strong as the core we saw that won the World Series in 2017, but is still the best at this point, the best young core in the American League West.
And already are the second favorites to win the World Series. I mean, already it's the Dodgers, I think, with the first favorite.
Yeah,
and the
500
Astros are second.
Yeah, 538 had a second. At least one other source did as well. And part of that's the AL West isn't going to be great next year. The A's are probably going to take a step back. I can't believe that they let
as they
Melvin
take a
go.
step south.
Well, there's that too. But I can't believe that they let Melvin go. And I think that's going to hurt them more than any free agents or attrition they have on their roster. The Mariners should be good, but I kind of view the Mariners as the 2015 Astros last year, where they made a surprise run out of nowhere, and they're going to take a little bit of step back before they really solidify as a franchise, because they're going to have some pitching issues and some other things that have to get worked out. The Angels are going to continue to suck until I die. I mean, that's just a thing. They don't have pitching. They're never going to have pitching. So they can sign every hitter in the world, and then you have whatever is going on at the truck stop in Arlington. And I'm sorry, I know we weren't doing a 2022 preview of the division.
We just laid it down for you.
But that's what the void is, right? So you start talking hot stove, and you start talking free agent deals, and you start talking, who you're going to sign. And we all have this cloud over us right now, or at least I do, about when is all that going to start happening, because the clock is ticking towards December 1st. And that's when I expect the world from a baseball perspective just to shut down and stop.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And so we'll jump topics and we'll go right to Correa's contract, and then we'll talk a little Gold Glove. But so there's been not confirmed reports of two different numbers, both of which seem to have about the same annual value. One for 5 years, 160 million. One for 6 years, 210 million. I mean, that's from an annual value perspective, that's right where Carlos wants to be. Obviously, is numbers. Do you think it's interesting that we've already seen offers, like they're trying to get this done before the CBA? And do these numbers, especially if they're initial offers, make you feel a little bit better about the Astros being in play? We'll start with you, Brian.
I mean, so Francisco Lindor signed a contract extension with the Mets of 10 years and $341 million, so $34 million a year. Carlos Correa thinks he's better than Francisco Lindor. They've always been compared to each other. They were drafted a few spots away from each other. And, so this contract offered by the Astros is mostly for public relations purposes. They're giving him a similar average annual value to that 34.1 million, but for nowhere near as many years. And certainly Correa can get an offer on the open market of something like 8 to 10 years, and the 5 to 6 year offers, if you're going to make those and make those serious. The Astros are willing to go up to the luxury tax line. They went over it in 2019. So they're willing to spend money relative to Major League Baseball teams. What they've never done and don't seem to have any interest in doing is offering a real long-term contract beyond 5 years. And so if that's the case, you got to blow Correa away with the average annual value he's going to get now, because obviously if he goes back on the free agent market 5 years from now, he's not going to get $34 million a year. So they need to offer him something like 40 to 45 million to get him to think about it.
Andy, what about you? You have a different take on it, or are you?
I think the last number I heard, and of course everything's unconfirmed at this point, although I do tend to trust Mark Berman with his sources because he's one of the few people in the Houston media that actually works for a living.
Chandler.
You're 6 at 210 for 6 years. That's a place that you can work from. I agree with Brian that Correa, from an ego perspective, and really from just an earnings perspective, let's just take personal feelings out of it. 10 years at a guaranteed rate is much more attractive than 5 years at a guaranteed rate. I think there's room for negotiation there, though. If he gets fully out on the open market, yes, somebody's going to give him a 10-year contract, and it's going to be the Yankees or potentially the Dodgers if they're not going to go to Seager, which I don't know if that's going to happen. Or you're going to see a team like the Rangers or the White Sox. I don't think the Rangers are really a player because they're very much attached to anybody who's ever been in Dallas before signing with them like they are every offseason, and it never happens. So we'll see where Kershaw and Story end up. But, part of it is driven by Correa's ego and the fact that he does think he's the best shortstop in baseball, and he's had the healthy season. So he did bet on himself and he won. I think they could get there at 7. I think you can get creative with mutual options and opt-outs and some other things. But the important thing right now is that the line of communication stay open and that it doesn't just get shut down like it did in the spring. And at least from Correa's camp, even though there's been a lot of speculation, nothing's been shut down yet. And I think that's an important part of the process. So we'll kind of see where that goes. If you have to Jake Kaplan's point, if you have to say, are the Astros going to re-sign him or does the field re-sign him? You have to take the field still at this point.
Sure.
So
yeah.
that's, if you ask me, that's where I'm going to be. But I think it's a little bit more positive. There's a more positive outlook right now than there was at the beginning of the spring, or when he decided to go to Chandler Rome and say that this is my last playoff series with the Astros. Good luck. Hope everything goes well. Which wasn't really the message he was trying to get across, and yet it was, because I think he immediately came out and said, well, I was a little misquoted, but
I will say
negotiations.
At a weird personal level, I feel somehow more positive about this than with Springer. Like Springer, it just felt like, for being upset with Luno from years ago and the service time manipulation, he wasn't coming back. It seems like Carlos, you might be able to play on his love of the city, love of the team, and get him to 7 with, like what Brian's saying, maybe 7 for 280, where it's about $40 million a year. But that would, I think, be better. And I don't know, but I mean, where do you guys sit on this whole thing? Like, I just live in fear of a 10-year contract, and now all of a sudden you've got no wiggle room at the end of it.
I think for me, there's a couple of things. So first of all, I want to get out of this idea that Crane doesn't spend money, because that's been the latest Twitter idiocy, that we've had the top 5 highest payroll in baseball since 2017. We're not shy about spending money when it makes sense. We just don't want to do it long-term as a franchise. That's the Cardinals model. We spend more than the Cardinals, frankly, but we just don't want to be tied down to long-term contracts. That's the philosophy. Will there eventually be an exception to that? Yeah. And I think that, might be Correa this time, but I think he's still going to be the exception. And you're still going to have this series of 5-year deals, 3-year deals to guys that we consider key players. The other part of that is, I don't think that one player kills you if you make that exception. So if you did choose it to be Correa, or you did choose it to be in his prime Justin Verlander, and you gave him a 10-year deal, I don't think that one player kills you. I think it's when you have a series of bad deal over bad deal over bad deal, and then you keep signing veteran players to keep chasing, which is where we got to in the mid-2000s with Carlos Lee and Miguel Tejada and some other players that you probably don't remember played for the Astros. But we spent a whole lot of money and personnel capital to get those players, and we got stuck in a cycle of a really bad minor league system and a really bad major league team, and that's not a great look. I don't see James Click signing on for that. I don't think he would have left the Tampa organization to build that here or get to that point. And I don't think Jim Crane, for all his faults, and I don't like Jim Crane personally, he wants to win, and I think he sees the value of having a winning franchise in Houston, and I think he's going to keep doing things to put us in a position to win from a spending standpoint. So from that perspective, I think it's positive. I just don't think it's always going to line up with the fan expectation, because we fall in love with guys versus falling in love with the team sometimes.
Brian, did you?
Yeah, I mean, so one important to note here is that Correa just turned 27. 27 is about the peak age for a baseball player. So, he's still in his prime. Springer was 30 moving on 31. He came up much later. Part of that was, as Andy noted, that the Astros held him back. But they held him back for reasons that worked out in the end, which is, we're not going to bring you up to run your service time on a bad team. we will hope that by the end of your service time, you're on a really good team. That turned out to be a correct assessment. So yeah, if you're going to make an exception, Correa is he is a great defender at a premium defensive position. He's younger than just about anybody else. And again, if he stays healthy, that's I think somewhere where you can invest sort of in the long term. Again, they seem to be very committed not to investing in the long term. They are as scared of long-term contracts as you are, James. And, there's good reasons for that. The important thing that is to be the Cardinals, if that's the model, to be the Dodgers today, the other team that's taken a Tampa Bay general manager and expanded on with payroll, is to continually bring up prospects who are effective, that can become part of your major league lineup and can continue to give you much more value than you have to pay them due to the structure of the Major League Baseball's salary system. So, bringing up a Jake Myers and Chas McCormick this year and turning them into major league regulars is a big step for the team in 2023 and 2024, because again, they can pay them under value, put them in center field, and therefore pay Jordan what he's going to get in arbitration at that point. They have to continually do that for it to be worthwhile. They've done that for the last 6 or 7 years, and they show signs of continuing to be able to do that. And if they can continue to do that, then
like Maldonado will not get re-signed again, and neither will Castro. Corey Lee will come up and assume the starting catching position probably in 2020.
Corey Lee is one of the top catching prospects in baseball. He was a controversial choice. Not controversial, but he seemed to be, most people had him as a second round pick or a later pick.
Yeah, he was a reach up.
Yeah. And it seems to have worked out so far. If he turns into a major league regular and you're paying your catcher $1 million, you can pay your shortstop $35 million.
Yeah. Hey, somebody said assume the position, which just made me giggle. I think this is, to Brian's point, you have to keep bringing players up who are major league contributors for this plan to work. And I think one of the things that has been downplayed, not by Major League Baseball, because they tell you every time the last 2 years of the draft has been televised, but it does hurt a franchise to lose 2 first round and 2 second round picks in consecutive years. That is a penalty that the Astros franchise has had to weather. They're out of that now, so they're finally going to have a first round pick. But the way baseball works is we're going to get a first round and a second round pick this year, and probably a supplemental pick for somebody. See how that goes. Those guys are 3 years away at the best. So we have this window now of not having top talent in theory, unless we can develop them like a Jake Myers, and find gems in the rough, or overreach a little bit like we did with Corey Lee, and hope that we can develop them, or know that we can develop them. And I think that's one of the things that the analytics brings you better than in-game play, is the ability to spot, to quote Moneyball, market deficiencies and take advantage of them.
How much of that did James Click, I think, do a pretty decent job of mitigating by signing 2 of the more high profile international free agents, though? Like, he seems like he did weather some of that.
So the Astros franchise, and a lot of Major League Baseball franchises are in the same boats. They don't have the Yankees or Dodgers television contracts, or the Red Sox for that matter. And that's part of the reason those 3 teams are at the top of the MLB food chain year after year. So the franchise like the Astros, to stay on top, they're going to have to spend money. They're going to have to be committed to winning, but they're going to have to do things that the rules allow them to do, including getting really aggressive in Latin America. And right now it's the Cubans. We're doing really well with the Cubans.
We're big in Cuba.
Well, we have 18. We signed 2 more this week, 2 more players in the low minors, but that means we have 18 Cubans in our organization right now. That's a big deal, and that's far away more than any other major league team. Before that, it was the Venezuelans, I believe, and we certainly had a big presence in the Dominican Republic before a lot of other teams did. That's what we're going to have to do to remain competitive, especially when you lose draft picks, especially with the crapshoot that the draft is in general.
Anyway, yeah.
Particularly when you're picking down in the first round and not in the first couple of picks.
Yeah, I mean, if everything goes to plan, the Astros aren't going to pick 1-1 ever again. I mean, that's just, that's the hope. If you're the Cardinals, you're always going to pick mid to lower end of the first round and every other round. So you're going to have to develop. You're going to have scouting and analytics that merge together to find the guys that you can actually turn into major league players, and not just sign the Billy Beans of the world who look good but don't necessarily have the ability to hit a curveball. And he'll say that. I didn't say that about him.
He does like his Twinkies, though, Billy Bean. That's what we learned from Moneyball. Brad Pitt eating a Twinkie really, I don't know. I felt fat shamed during that, but all right. We did get to.
If you felt, I'm sorry, but if you felt fat shamed, imagine Art Howe being portrayed by who he was portrayed by.
Oh my God.
Art Howe's never weighed more than 170 pounds in his life. And Philip Seymour Hoffman, I don't think saw 170 since seventh grade.
My nephew is friends with Art Howe's grandson, and so Art Howe once came to my sister's house to pick him up, and she was telling me about this, and I asked her the obvious question: does he look like Philip Seymour Hoffman? She said, absolutely not. So,
absolutely not. Yeah, rest in peace, Philip Seymour Hoffman. Hey, gone way too soon. Did get some good Astros news. Carlos Correa and Yuli. After Keith Law said he couldn't play defense, Yuli winning the Gold Glove.
Bad defensive first baseman.
Yeah. Boy, if we should have some so often. No, but just good for those guys. I know that, I love the fact that the Astros have always put so much pride in defense, and it's good that it showed up. You could have made the argument for all of them winning, I think, but it was nice to see those two guys get one.
One point I made constantly throughout the playoffs, both here and in my writing, is the Astros defense was their biggest advantage. And really throughout the season, the Astros pitching staff didn't have great numbers in strikeouts. They were near the league average. They were below average in walk rate. I think they were 22nd in walk rate, but they were top 10 in run prevention. And that is almost entirely because they had one of the best defenses. So if you hit the ball in the field of play, the Astros were more likely than any other team to catch the ball and put you out. And so I'm happy there's recognition for that. Also, sort of second thing to sort of make a note of with regard to this is the voting for Gold Glove is done. It's now a formula where it's partly some statistics. So it's not Rafael Palmeiro winning for playing 20 games at first base again. It's not some of the more embarrassing things. It's not Derek Jeter constantly winning because everyone just likes him. But it is a vote from managers and coaches. And I didn't think any Astro would win because that seems to be an easy way to say, we did similar things, but I still don't have to like what they did.
Right.
And I can take it out a little bit on them here in a way that's very, I want to do Correa, or I want to do JP Crawford. I'm just going to do JP Crawford. So that I think was sort of a sign that the league is going to, at some extent, move on from the sign stealing scandal.
Well, and I think it also shows that it was a little bit overplayed, right? So the media was the driver of the outrage. The fans bought into it, especially on social media. Other than a handful of players, the players were strangely silent about it. And I really think the players that spoke out weren't seeking to speak out, but every question in spring training in 2020 was, hey, did you hear about this? What do you think about that? And you have to give an answer at some point, or else you're, not answering kind of gives the opinion out to the world. I think it just goes to show that despite what a lot of famous Twitter people want to have you believe, the players are over it. The players are past it. And Major League Baseball, from a on-field perspective, wasn't all that upset about it to begin with.
Well, and I think the only reason,
exceptions.
the only one who really spoke out like voluntarily was Cody Bellinger, and he was stoned anyway. He doesn't remember.
I mean, but what were they actually asking about? They could have been asking him about his favorite Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah, which apparently Altuve stole a copy of from Judge.
Could have been.
That's what it was all about. So now we're on the precipice. How do you guys? I guess this will be our check-in, and then we'll start, checking in through the hot stove stuff. But CBA, I'm really predicting disaster. What about you, Brian?
I don't know if I'm predicting disaster, but the deadline for the CBA expires on midnight, December 1st. no one loses any money at midnight on December 1st from that expiring. So there's no reason to think, that they're going to come to an agreement, particularly with them being relatively far apart before December 1st, and therefore there will be a lockout. The question is, when do they start feeling actual financial pressure of like, I'm not going to get a paycheck from the player standpoint, or I'm losing season ticket sales, I'm losing money at the gate, and I'm going to have to lose games and not get money from the TV networks. And that's sometime in February or early March. So my wife said after the World Series, well, she looked it up and said pitchers and catchers report in X number of days. And I said, I hate to tell you this, but that's not accurate.
No, we had that when we were sitting at the Arizona Fall League. We were like, oh, that's really weird. This place is going to be filled with spring training fans in a couple of months, except it won't.
So
now, how does it work though? I mean, it's something I'm ignorant on. Like, every business stops if there's a lockout. Like, you can't negotiate with a free agent. Like, is that market going to stop as well?
I mean, you can't. What James Click and Carlos Correa's agents text to each other, I don't think is, that can't stop it, much less conversations between Jose Altuve and Carlos Correa, or Martin Maldonado and Carlos Correa when they go to WWE events together. They can't have official signings. There won't be a Rule 5 draft. There won't be the winter meetings. The Major League Baseball part of that won't happen. And
Major League Baseball's already killed the minor league baseball part of that too. So they just won't happen.
Yeah.
Andy?
I think that's the big part of it, is nothing official can happen if the CBA is out. And I can't remember who I was talking to, but somebody was asking me, what's going to be covered in the CBA, or what's literally the CBA is everything that governs how Major League Baseball runs. And the easy highlight is the universal DH, which everybody expects to happen at some point through these negotiations. But it's everything, the things that are going to be important and sticking points are going to be service time manipulation, what the penalty is for that. And so there's a lot of things to work out, and it's hard to get a taste because the owners are, you're a billionaire for a reason, with a few exceptions, but you don't get to own a Major League Baseball club and be an idiot. So they're not negotiating through the media right now. So you're not getting a real picture of what their issues are. But if you want a real picture of what the issues are, go back to the summer of 2020 when they were trying to put together a truncated season and see how contentious those talks were when everybody wanted to play. And that was 20% of what I anticipate is going to start happening after December 1st.
Well, and I tell you what I find, sorry to cut you off. I'll go back to you in a second. Yeah. What I find interesting too is the breed of owner is different than it was in 1994. That you still had a lot of sort of baseball families owning teams in 94. Now these are people who look at it as purely an investment of some sort. And they may be, I think they're going to be a much tougher negotiating partner than they were then. Andy, I'm sorry, you can continue.
No problem. To that point, I think you're right. I think there are some, and I will give Jim Crane credit here since this is primarily an Astros podcast. I think he is a guy that wants to win and doesn't look at it primarily as an investment, but it is an investment. They all have minority owners. Very few people own a baseball team outright because it's a multi-billion-dollar investment at this point. But the axiom of how you make money owning a baseball team is still true. You make money when you sell that team. So all of the CBA negotiation and work is always to lay the ground to make it an appetizing investment for the next buyer. So it is always, from the owner standpoint, always going to be about player control. How long do we have this indentured servitude of a system? How long do you get to have these guys? What kind of money can you make on their backs? And from the player perspective, it's that exact opposite. How quickly can I get to the point where I can play where I want to play?
Right.
And those are the two primary issues. What I would love to come out of it and what I would be willing to tolerate from a long work stoppage is something like a national television contract and a national effort towards marketing teams and those things that aren't really governed by the CBA. until you get into player image and likeness, which is where it comes in. So that's why it could come up. But that's it. The ultimate issue is no matter what comes up, owners want to have more control for longer time. Players want to have all the control on their side and shorter service times. Those are the two issues that everything else is window dressing and add-ons.
Yeah, and of course the other big topic will be salary, luxury tax ceiling, and salary floor.
But again, that's all driven by how quickly can you get a player where they want to be. If the players don't want a cap because they don't want to be told ultimately I can't go play in New York because New York can only spend $250 million and they've already spent it. So you're inhibiting player movement.
Yeah.
The owners don't want a floor because they don't want to spend more money than they have to. Pittsburgh doesn't want to spend more than they already do to have the same team generally because they're not investing in scouting and analytics and on-field talent and all those other things. I think the floor, and I know we're going to get into this over the next couple of months, the floor would do more towards parity in the league and more exciting baseball than anything else they're going to talk about.
Brian?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I think is different from your point earlier about comparing it to 1994 in the massive work stoppage then. 1994, the owners were split very much between large market owners and small market owners. And in many ways, the way I understand 1994 is the conflict between the owners was the biggest factor driving the strike and their inability to settle and their willingness to engage in.
Yeah, I remember that too, for sure.
Yeah. And 1994, by the way, the 1994 strike ended not because they came to an agreement, but because federal courts ruled that Major League Baseball was engaging in unfair labor practices. By the way, the judge who ruled that, the federal district court judge who ruled that, is Sonia Sotomayor, now in the Supreme Court. It is a massive weakness of the American political system that she was not immediately elevated to the Supreme Court after that decision to bring baseball back. But anyway, that's
where are our priorities?
I mean,
I'm sorry, was 95 the beginning of 95 when they had the basically the AAA rosters for a couple of weeks?
Yes.
I mean, it's been 20 years, so I'm trying to.
That's when the replacement players came to spring training, and it was one of many attempts by the owners to break the union. Yep. And we've had essentially labor peace since then, because the owners in some ways have gotten better at clawing back, getting more money by basically having Rob Manfred be the smartest guy in the room and figure out how to put small things in that advantage the owners and keep sort of turning the wheel.
I think they also kind of kicked it down the can, because I think the last time the CBA was up was 2011-ish, somewhere around the beginning of the 2010s. And they basically just, we'll worry about this in 2021, which, worked for a while, I guess.
Here we are. Last question then. Justin Verlander, do you think he accepts his qualifying offer? Brian?
No, I think he wants a multi-year deal. The interesting part here is by having the qualifying offer on Verlander, it increases the cost to other teams to sign him because they have to give up draft picks in compensation that goes to the Astros. And therefore, and that's not a cost the Astros have to bear. It makes it potentially easier for the Astros to re-sign Verlander. It will cost them less because they don't have to give up draft picks.
Andy?
I don't think Verlander's signing for a qualifying offer, but I don't think I closed the window on Verlander re-signing with the Astros. And it might just be a 2 or 3 year deal, or 2 with a club option or something along those lines, because Verlander, ego aside, does have to do a make good deal wherever he's going. There's no, if the believed preference is the Dodgers rotation is still stacked, even if they don't re-sign Kershaw, because they will eventually get the one abuser back on the roster. That's just.
I don't think Bauer ever pitches for the Dodgers again. I think
I will be willing to bet you a frosty beer that he will.
Okay.
Because I think that a whole thing gets settled out of court and you're never going to hear a word about it again. And the Dodgers, despite their fans' insistence, aren't any better than any other franchise from a morality standpoint. But anyway, you've got to look at where is the market for Justin Verlander. And if he wants, he's not going to get $34 million a year again. That's not where he is in his career. So it's where does he have a chance to win? The Astros are a very attractive option because of that. They have a chance to win. He's got familiarity, and Crane's ego might give him a 3-year deal.
So the other thing is the Astros, while they don't want to give out long-term contracts, they are willing to spend money. Old guys who are willing to sign short-term contracts who you still think are good. And
Right.
So that also could mean Max Scherzer. That also could mean Clayton Kershaw would be possibilities for the Astros, because you could sign him to a 2-year contract for a lot of money.
I'm sorry. I've already read that Arlington's signing him and Trevor Story and anybody who's ever flown through DFW Airport, because that's who wouldn't want to go play for a team that won 60 games this year.
Well,
If I'm signing a 2-year contract, I'm not signing a 2-year contract. I'm not signing to play for the Rangers for the next 2 years. If my goal is to win the World Series, the Story's goal may be to sign a long-term contract, and the Rangers be more willing to give it to him than others. I don't know.
Right, I think you're insulated from Rangers fans up where you live. They all believe they're signing everybody,
and they're winning it
year.
next year.
There are a few advantages to where I live from a baseball standpoint, but being insulated from Rangers fans is one of them. So.
Well, we're all insulated from Rangers fans on this show. All right, guys, we'll be back soon to check in on the hot stove. Y'all have a good day, and go Stros.
Go Stros, go CBA.
Thanks, James. Go Stros.